They stopped him right before he stepped through the security gate, not because he'd done anything wrong, and not because the scanner had gone off. They asked about his ticket, then quietly called for backup, eyes filled with suspicion. The irony? The man they were treating like an uninvited guest was the one holding the keys to a $48 million zero-cent strategic partnership contract with this very airline. His name was Dorian Brant, 58 years old, a man whose composure was perhaps his sharpest weapon. That morning he had arrived at JFK International Airport, Terminal 4, bright and early. Every detail about him spoke of meticulous precision. A dark gray suit with perfectly pressed creases, a crisp white collar hugging his neck, and gleaming leather shoes that made no sound as he walked. He wasn't in a rush. He was used to early flights and late-night deals. In his left hand was a dark brown leather bag. Inside were documents, a laptop, and the contract every executive would dream of signing if they hoped to secure the future of sustainable logistics. In his right hand, he held a first-class boarding pass to San Francisco. He was the keynote speaker at the Western Agricultural Sustainability Summit, where it addressed hundreds of investors, CEOs, and policymakers eager to reshape the way the world approaches farming. No one had boarded yet at Gate 17. A few passengers sipped coffee. Others were glued to their phones. Dorian walked up to the check-in counter, just as he'd done countless times before. He gave the young woman at the desk a polite nod and extended his boarding pass. But that's where everything stopped. She didn't scan it. She didn't greet him. She just looked at him. A slow, assessing gaze. Then a second glance, longer this time. It was a look Dorian had grown far too familiar with in his life. A blend of skepticism and bias. "This lane is for first-class passengers," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, jarring against the quiet calm of the morning. "I'm aware," Dorian replied, his tone smooth and still, like a lake without ripples. She blinked. Finally, she raised the pass to the scanner, but her hand stopped short. She didn't press the button. Instead, she turned to a colleague behind her, whispering something inaudible, but enough to make the other person turn and glance at Dorian too. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't show emotion, but something in his eyes had shifted. "May I see your ID?" the woman asked. No apology, no explanation. "They don't usually ask for that here," Dorian replied, tilting his head slightly, polite but pointed. "Is there a problem?" "Just a security measure," she said, avoiding eye contact. Dorian didn't argue. He pulled out his wallet, handed her his government-issued driver's license. Clear as day. Dorian L. Brant. She took it as if it were something unfamiliar, then placed it on the counter, not scanned, not checked, just left it there. Then walked away. Moments later, a man in a black uniform approached. "Security." No greeting, no questions. He simply stood next to Dorian, as if the man needed to be monitored. The security officer stood close, silent. His eyes scanned Dorian as though assessing a potential threat, but Dorian remained perfectly still, calm. He didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He knew this. When people expect a scene, silence can be the most powerful response. He calmly stepped aside, away from the boarding lane. Quietly, he reached into his blazer and pulled out his phone. One call. It rang a few times, then a woman answered. "Maggie, it's me. I need you to pull up the catering contract we signed with Horizon Air 2 weeks ago, the one for the Western routes." Dorian looked straight ahead. No anger, no expression. The check-in agent now realized he was still there. She leaned toward the mic and announced, gently but clearly, "We're just resolving a minor issue. Thank you for your patience." But no one looked patient. A man in a gray pullover leaned forward and whispered to the person next to him, "Did he do something?" Dorian heard it, but he didn't turn, didn't react. He was used to whispers behind his back. Maggie returned to the line. "I have it. Do you want me to call headquarters?" "No need," Dorian said calmly. "Just flag it in the system. I think they're about to realize their mistake." He ended the call and tucked the phone back into his pocket. The boarding pass still rested in his hand, a quiet reminder that sometimes power isn't in how loud you speak, but in how firmly you stand. That call wasn't a complaint, it was a warning. Because, Buran, the man in the tailored suit and first-class seat, had once lived a very different life. He grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, in an old wooden house with creaky floors and noisy mornings, filled with clanging pots and the groans of a father exhausted from the night shift. His mother, Eunice, worked in the produce section at the local grocery store. His father, Leonard, pulled shifts at the steel plant and fixed neighbors' cars on weekends for extra cash. They weren't wealthy, but they always had dinner on the table. And more than anything, Dorian was taught this. The way you carry yourself in the world determines how the world treats you. By age 15, Dorian was waking up at 5 a.m. every Saturday to help his mom sort crates of fruits and vegetables before the store opened. That's where he learned to spot a ripe melon by touch, to detect a bad apple with just a glance, and most importantly, how to talk with people, not at them. See the difference? One is communication, the other is connection. And Dorian learned that early. At 23, he graduated from Kent State University with a degree in agricultural business. He had just $330,000, 0 cents to his name. Not inheritance, but a mix of savings, scholarships, and a few profits from summer farming gigs. His first project? A roadside produce stand near Columbus, a borrowed pickup truck, a makeshift tent, and a determination to turn every ear of sweet corn into gold. The turning point came in his early 30s, when he spotted a gap no one else had. Life isn't just what you see. Dorian didn't start at the finish line. So what kept him calm while being publicly questioned at the gate? What gave him the strength to not push back, but still make the system step back? What about you if you were Dorian? Would you stay silent or react? Imagine yourself in that moment and get ready, because the next chapter brings a stunning reversal. The idea didn't come from a TED Talk or a fancy summit. It came from everyday observations. Big supermarket chains needed clean, scalable, reliable produce, not overpriced boutique organic goods on high shelves, not farmers market novelties. Real food, grown clean, delivered fast, and trusted. That's how Brant Global Foods was born, not in a glass tower, but a rented garage. Equipment, a glitchy laptop, a beat-up truck, and a single delivery route. Dorian drove to farms across the Midwest, signed deals in person, built trust one handshake at a time. It took nearly 15 years before his company earned a seat at the table with national distributors. Today, Brant Global Foods supplies produce to over 30 premium grocery chains, 5 major university systems, and most recently, Horizon Air. Yes, the same airline. They came to him. After a string of bad press and poor customer satisfaction surveys, they needed a total revamp of their in-flight meals. Dorian didn't pitch loudly. He listened, then presented a plan. Seasonal rotations, direct from farm sourcing, packaging that cut waste in half. Horizon Air didn't hesitate. They signed the deal, worth $48 million, 0 cents. But despite all the success, Dorian never forgot where he came from. His office doesn't display trophies or framed degrees. If you visit Brant Global's headquarters in Dayton, you'll find a black and white photo of that first fruit stand and a wall covered in handwritten thank you letters from farmers. Maggie, his assistant, handles paperwork, contracts, logistics. Dorian, he handles people. He doesn't like noise, doesn't seek attention, and he especially doesn't talk about power. He only uses it when absolutely necessary. So when the check-in agent at JFK studied his face more intently than the boarding pass, and security watched him like a threat instead of a first-class guest, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a reminder that it doesn't matter how many deals you've signed or how much you've helped them rebuild their reputation. Some people only see what they want to see, and if you don't match the image they have in their heads, they'll invent reasons to doubt you. But Dorian Brant doesn't need to raise his voice to prove his worth. His entire life is a silent, living rebuttal. That phone call at Gate 17? Not to escalate. It was an invitation for the airline to quietly correct its mistake, because Dorian believes in kindness, but he also believes in standards. Fortunately, at Gate 17, none of that mattered. To the woman behind the counter, he was just another unfamiliar name on a boarding pass, someone who didn't look like he belonged in that line. Her name was Haley, mid-30s, recently transferred from Tulsa to JFK less than a month ago, new to the job, eager to prove herself. That day she was ready to show she was capable. She just didn't expect the first person she misjudged would be someone who could rewrite the way her entire system worked. Haley had been trained thoroughly, maintain order, follow protocol, never let anyone cross the line. But what she lacked was something no training could teach: intuition, the ability to read a room, sense a person before passing judgment. Now the line was growing. A man in a navy windbreaker with Bluetooth earbuds paced near the front. Behind him, a woman with a floral suitcase watched the scene with growing irritation. The tension spread like invisible smoke. Haley adjusted the mic clipped to her collar and whispered something into her headset, calling for backup. She stole a glance at Dorian, who was still standing outside the boarding lane. His expression was calm, quiet, unmoving, but also unwavering. Mia, her colleague at the desk, leaned in and whispered, "Is something actually going on?" Haley shrugged. "He says he's first class." Mia raised an eyebrow. "His ticket is first class. So what's the issue?" Haley frowned. "I don't know, something just feels off." In a subtle shift, Mia changed her stance. It wasn't obvious, not attention-grabbing, but it sent a clear message. Be careful. Haley didn't catch it. She was focused on her screen, pretending to search for a reservation note she knew didn't exist. The security officer nearby remained silent, arms crossed, occasionally glancing at Dorian. Still no explanation for his presence. Passengers continued boarding. The first-class line was thinning out. Haley glanced toward the gate, anxiety creeping into her posture, but her pride held her back. Then Dorian's phone buzzed. He stepped a few feet away to take the call. Maggie's voice was steady. "I've escalated to their regional VP. I also notified Jack Renna. He's their food service integration lead." "Thank you," Dorian said softly. "Keep me posted." He hung up and slipped his hand into his pocket. No frustration in his expression, just calm, like a man waiting for an elevator, not someone at the center of a quiet insult. Back at the counter, Mia was growing uneasy. She pulled Haley aside. "Do you know who he is?" she whispered. "That's Dorian Brant. I saw his company on the supplier list last week. The new produce deal with Horizon." Haley's face drained of color. "Wait. What?" "Helm owns Brant Global Foods. They're partnering with us." Haley's throat went dry. She looked back at Dorian. He was still standing there, ticket in hand, gaze steady but without anger. A wall of silence, heavy with meaning. "Maybe just let him board?" Mia suggested, but Haley panicked. "We can't. If I let him through now, it's like admitting I messed up." She didn't finish. A deep, authoritative voice came through her headset. "Haley, I need a status update on Gate 17. We're seeing signs of a delay." She froze. "I'm just handling a passenger. Everything is under control." The voice on the other end sounded unconvinced. "Make sure it is. We have senior leadership flying this morning. No surprises." Haley tried to keep her hands from shaking. She looked at Dorian again. His gaze wasn't accusatory, but it made her feel smaller with every second. She wasn't managing an incident anymore. She was becoming part of it. Mia turned and looked ready to approach Dorian, this time likely to apologize. A beep came from the gate scanner. A passenger walked through. A man in khakis turned back and frowned. What's the holdup? Haley didn't answer. Her throat tightened, her voice lost somewhere between pressure and fear of being wrong. Meanwhile, Dorian calmly stepped aside, not toward the desk, but to the window overlooking the tarmac. He stood there, hands folded behind his back, watching the baggage carts move beneath the muted sunlight. No rush, no concern. He was letting time speak for him. And Haley could feel every second ticking like a countdown to a mistake too big to undo. But now, the gears of the system were beginning to turn. 10 floors above the terminal, in an office with runway views and a Manhattan skyline backdrop, Cynthia Reyes, Horizon's regional executive, was halfway through a croissant and a quarterly report. Her desk phone rang. She usually didn't answer unrecognized numbers, but this call had been forwarded twice and flagged as urgent by her assistant. "This is Cynthia," she answered professionally. "Hello, Cynthia. This is Maggie Geller calling on behalf of Mr. Dorian Brant, CEO of Brant Global Foods. We've just been made aware of a serious incident involving Mr. Brant at Gate 17. Cynthia sat up straight and set her pastry down. "What happened?" Maggie's voice remained composed. "It appears your staff has denied Mr. Brant boarding, despite his first-class ticket. We're concerned the situation may escalate." No further detail was needed. Cynthia had heard Dorian Brant's name far too often in recent months. Not as just another vendor, but a key supplier. The man spearheading Horizon's complete overhaul of its in-flight catering after a disastrous media fallout over frozen meals and excess packaging. This wasn't just poor customer service. This was a spark in a room full of gasoline. "I'll handle it," Cynthia said quickly. She stood up and signaled to her assistant. "Is he still at the gate?" Is. Calm but clearly being mistreated, Cynthia grabbed her coat, heels clicking sharply down the hallway. She turned to her assistant. "Contact Sean and Elise from Brand Integrity, now." Meanwhile, at Horizon's Minneapolis headquarters, Jack Renault, Director of Food Service Integration, was halfway through lunch when his phone rang. "Jack, it's Maggie. I won't sugarcoat it. Dorian's being held at JFK. Your team flagged him for no reason." Jack nearly dropped his fork. "You're kidding." "Nope, he called me himself." Jack pushed his chair back and stood. "I called Cynthia. She's already on her way. But you may want to loop in legal just in case." Jack didn't respond. He just hung up and started dialing. He knew if this got out, everything they'd built for months, the upcoming Fresh Flight campaign, the promo video in final edits, the press release scheduled for next week, could unravel because one employee didn't recognize the strategic face behind their transformation. Back at Gate 17, sweat was starting to soak the back of Haley's shirt, not from heat, but from the atmosphere. Mia said nothing, a cold silence more piercing than any words. Passengers were murmuring, phones were coming out. The flight app clearly showed boarding hadn't started, Haley felt. Everything slipping out of her hands. But the worst was yet to come. Footsteps echoed down the terminal in quick succession. A man in a navy suit wearing a Horizon ID badge strode toward Gate 17. Right behind him, a woman in red heels, phone pressed to her ear. Cynthia Reyes, Regal executive, had just ended her final call as she stepped onto the scene. Dorian hadn't moved. He recognized her immediately and understood why she was there. Cynthia approached, extending her hand. Firm, but respectful. "Mr. Brant, I'm Cynthia Reyes, regional executive at Horizon Air. May I have a word with you in private?" Dorian nodded, finally placing his phone back in his pocket. "Aldert, of course." They stepped aside, just far enough to separate from the watching crowd. Behind them, Haley stood frozen, unsure whether to follow or disappear, her headset still on. But she hadn't spoken in minutes. Cynthia exhaled lightly before speaking. "Mr. Brand, on behalf of Horizon Air, I sincerely apologize. I have launched an internal inquiry to understand what happened. This should not have occurred. I'd like to personally escort you onto the plane." Dorian showed no emotion. He simply asked, "Do you know which seat I've been assigned?" Cynthia tapped her tablet. "Seat 1A, He gave a faint smile. First row. How fitting. I was told this lane was for first-class passengers only. Cynthia didn't blink. Again, my sincerest apologies. But Dorian leaned slightly, his gaze sharp. Patient with me. The issue isn't the mistake, Miss Cynthia swallowed. I understand. But Dorian wasn't seeking punishment. He was waiting for something harder. The truce. At the check-in desk, Haley hadn't moved. Everyone now sensed something was wrong. The screen still showed the flight is on time, but no one was boarding. Mia avoided Haley's eyes. No need for words, no need for looks. The blame was clear. Cynthia signaled to another employee, tall, with light blonde hair, a black badge lanyard, professional posture, perceptive eyes. This was Justin Coe, Horizon's Eastern Regional Counsel. He had been briefed in the elevator and knew this wasn't the time for explanations. He approached and extended a hand. Mr. Brant, I'm Justin Cole. I want to personally apologize for what you just experienced. But, Dorian gently cut in, I don't need an apology, Mr. Cole. I need an explanation. Why something like this could happen after we signed a $48 million 0 cents contract. Justin paused. There was no good answer to that. No PR script smooth enough for this moment. Cynthia stepped in. Mr. Brant, we understand the gravity of this situation. We're reviewing our entire employee protocol, including training programs on conduct and implicit bias. We want you to know this does not reflect our core values. Dorian raised an eyebrow, his voice light as air but heavy as a hammer. You mean to say this doesn't represent the company's values? Or, Dorian continued, still calm, it doesn't reflect the airline's essence, but it does reflect the judgment of your employee. No one responded. He gestured toward Haley, now standing behind the desk, pale as if she could melt into the floor tiles. She saw a well-dressed man holding a first-class ticket and assumed he didn't belong. Not once. She called security and escalated the situation, all because I asked a simple question. Dorian didn't need to say more. You don't need to explain to me what that is, he said, his eyes still on Haley. I've lived with it my entire life. Justin swallowed hard, then spoke up. We're prepared to issue an official apology, if that's your preference, either privately or publicly. Dorian didn't nod, didn't shake his head, didn't react. He simply reached into his leather bag and pulled out a slim yellow folder. No theatrics, no drama, just paperwork. This is the signed contract, he said, handing it to Cynthia. My company currently supplies all fresh food for flights across the Western and Midwestern regions, including the produce served in your premium lounges. Cynthia accepted the folder as if it weighed twice as much as it should. So, Dorian continued, when I say that the person stopped at the gate is your brand, I mean that literally. He looked her in the eye. I don't need a tweet. I don't need a letter. I need change. He spoke slower now. Because next time, the person your team treats like a threat for doing nothing wrong might not have a direct line to your vice president. The air turned to ice. Nearby passengers began whispering. Some were pretending to scroll on their phones, while actually recording everything. Justin stepped back, visibly uncomfortable. We'll begin a full review immediately and make staffing changes if necessary. You have my word, he said. Dorian glanced at his watch. Good. Then let's get back to our day. Cynthia was ready to escort him, but Dorian paused. He turned to look at Haley. The young woman now clutched her employee badge like a shield. Her face was white, her eyes on the verge of breaking, but Dorian said nothing. He didn't need to, because sometimes disappointment, delivered in silence, weighs more than any reprimand. Cynthia nodded at the attendant to open the gate. Dorian walked down the jet bridge, Justin trailing quietly behind. Mia stepped beside Haley. She didn't say much, just one line, low but sharp as a blade. You have no idea, his company supplies nearly half the first-class meals you're checking in. Haley didn't respond. But that fact, now no longer just internal knowledge, was a crack in her understanding, and a reminder she wouldn't soon forget. The flight crew had been alerted. When Dorian entered the first-class cabin, he wasn't greeted with the usual rehearsed smiles, but with looks full of understanding. A flight attendant named Jordan gently took his coat. Another quickly brought him a bottle of water, without him asking, "Mr. Brant, if there's anything you need before takeoff," Jordan said in a soft, almost whispering tone. "Please, don't hesitate to ask." Dorian didn't say much. He wasn't looking for gestures. He wasn't demanding anything. He simply took his seat, 1A, where he should have been 45 minutes ago, and stared straight ahead. Because sometimes those who are truly powerful only need to be quiet and let the world learn from its own mistakes. Dorian set the bottle on a small tray in front of him without taking a sip. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Not a sigh of relief, but a controlled, measured breath, as if even his breathing had to remain composed. But outside the cabin something strange was unfolding. The terminal gradually slowed. Passengers began checking the monitors more frequently. The status at Gate 17 changed from "now boarding" to "delayed." Then, within 10 minutes, 2 adjacent gates followed suit. At Gate 18, a man in a gray blazer tapped the counter but received only a vague response. "We're conducting an internal review." It wasn't just Dorian's flight being affected. 3 Horizon Air flights in that section of the terminal were suddenly delayed, with no clear reason, only vague explanations. Technical processing, crew realignment, operational inspection. The truth? Horizon had quietly issued a soft lockdown across operations. A subtle, but deliberate pause. The moment Dorian was escorted on board, Cynthia Reyes headed straight into an internal conference room behind the terminal. She was now in an emergency meeting with legal, HR, and crisis communication. The directive was clear. Before this incident reaches the public, every detail must be accounted for. Log records, camera footage, staff notes, internal chats, everything was under review. Everyone who had interacted with Dorian that morning was being pulled aside. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. That plane wasn't going anywhere. Until they understood just how deep this damage might go. Dorian sat still, eyes closed. Not angry, not anxious, but his stillness wasn't peace. It was experience. The kind of experience shaped by having to act like certain slights didn't hurt, simply because they happened so often. He thought of his father, Leonard, who once got denied a car sale because he didn't look like he could afford it. Thought of his first investor meeting in Columbus where he was mistaken for the valet, and he remembered that even after all these years, it still happened, just at a higher altitude. Jordan, the flight attendant, returned. His voice was gentle, like wind. "Mr. Brand, we've just been informed there's a temporary delay. They're working through an issue with the ground team. We'll update you shortly." Dorian gave a slight nod. Jordan hesitated, then added, like he couldn't keep it in, "I saw what happened out there. It wasn't right. I know that." Dorian opened his eyes. "Thank you." Silence settled over them. Then Jordan added, "My brother's studying agriculture. I once told him to watch your speech from the Sustainability Summit last year. You made everything feel real. He still talks about you." For the first time since boarding, Dorian looked Jordan in the eye, a small, genuine smile, not polite, not performative, just one human to another. "I appreciate that." Jordan stepped away. Dorian leaned back in his seat. Up front, the pilot emerged from the cockpit. He exchanged a few words with the lead flight attendant. Their voices were soft enough to be polite, but just loud enough for the aware to hear. Dorian caught the phrase "ground hold" coming faintly over the comms. No one knew how long the flight would wait. At the back of the cabin, a man sighed in frustration. "Knew it. This airline never gets its act together." Dorian didn't respond. He tilted his head toward the window, watching clouds drift lazily past. He had done his part. What happened next no longer belonged to him. The internal report landed on Cynthia's desk. A brief summary, no threat detected, no disruption reported, The only irregularity, a call to security from the gate staff with no documented justification. That alone was more than enough. Haley was asked to step away from her post. Quietly, no announcement, no formal reprimand. The next day her name was gone from the shift roster. At the same time, a photo began circulating discreetly. Dorian Brant, standing tall near the gate, phone to his ear. The caption read simply, "I'm sorry I hurried through the lesson. I started with one ticket, added admissions each week, and I made a shift and couldn't get back to my desk. My boss, the line crew, looked at me and chuckled simultaneously. Flight to San Francisco, 1:15 p.m. Dorian was among the last to deplane. He wasn't in a hurry. While other passengers rushed toward taxis, baggage claims, or connecting gates, he walked steadily outside. He didn't check his phone until seated in the back of a black Lincoln, en route to the Marriott Hotel, home of the Western Agricultural Sustainability Summit. Inside the conference hall, the room buzzed with low conversation. Dorian entered unnoticed at first, quiet as always, sharply dressed, heading straight to the backstage area where his keynote was scheduled. A few people began to recognize him. Handshakes were brief, nods were polite. No one mentioned the airport. No sympathy was offered. And that's exactly how he preferred it. 20 minutes later, he stepped on stage. The conference room was packed. Spotlights hit him, but he said nothing about Gate 17. At least, not directly. The keynote, not about the incident, but about the system. He spoke about resilience in food supply chains, about how small assumptions in procurement, storage, logistics can cause large-scale consequences. He told a story about a beet farmer in Kansas who nearly lost his entire harvest due to one missed email, and how that email prompted him to overhaul his company's internal communication system. But toward the end he paused, looked down at the room, entrepreneurs, suppliers, academics, logistics experts, and he said, sometimes the issue isn't the system, the issue is the people running the system. When they let bias, assumptions, and complacency become the standard for how things operate, no one moved. They didn't need to. Notifications poured in. Emails from Horizon EX, a message from Maggie saying the legal team had sent a draft apology letter, a link to a local news blog. Someone had broken the story from jail. It didn't go viral, no clickbait headlines, just a quiet current, spreading exactly where it needed to go. Sometimes, what's most dangerous isn't the system itself, but the shortcuts we take when judging people. The room held its breath. Then Dorian continued, voice low but steady. Whether you're dealing with a new supplier, a potential partner, or simply someone standing at a boarding gate with a valid ticket, what you assume about them often says more about you than it does about them. The applause came, not thunderous, not performative, but real. The kind of applause from people who knew they'd just been reminded of something big, something easy to forget. A man from a Seattle distribution company gently tapped Dorian's shoulder. Hey, that thing you said about shortcuts. It hit me harder than I expected. Dorian smiled. Rot always starts there, the shortcut. Cynthia Reyes sat at her screen, reading the full report from the internal review team. Haley's file had been flagged. But Dorian had never asked for her to be fired, never demanded compensation, never responded to the offer of a public apology. He didn't need to. Horizon's senior leadership understood what had happened, and they knew. They had nearly lost more than just a contract. In the week that followed, Horizon Air quietly announced a new partnership with a civil rights consultancy focused on bias awareness training and equitable workplace practices. A few media outlets made the connection. Dorian's name was mentioned only indirectly. In a statement from Horizon's spokesperson, recent events remind us of the work we still have to do. Dorian made no comment, didn't repost, didn't share the article. He went back to work, and when Maggie asked if he wanted to accept an interview request from GQ, he simply replied, "Tell them I'm busy, making sure people get fed." The story didn't explode, it didn't trend, but it stayed in the places it needed to. Those who were at the airport that morning retold it over dinner tables. Someone who saw the photo of him standing still, phone to ear, used it in a presentation on quiet leadership. People working at Horizon Air began whispering in break rooms, pausing a beat longer before hitting the call button, thinking twice, and somewhere else in a kitchen in Oha, Mrs. Eunice Brant, now retired, sat in front of a screen, reading the article. She smiled, a deep, quiet smile, and softly said, "That's my boy." Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Share it, pass it on, or tell the story so that one day at some boarding gate somewhere, the person who belongs won't be stopped, simply because others haven't yet learned how to truly see.